Uh, I mean, it's a very complicated question, and let me just offer a principle, and then we'll see if we take it any further. I mean, we've been having this discussion now for 3 or 4 years with a half a dozen doctors, physicians from the Mayo Clinic regarding healing, and this has been extremely fascinating. They come down, we've gone up there, carrying on to what does it mean to heal. Okay, but one of them, because this kind of question, they weren't interested, they didn't want a dialogue on ethical questions. They wanted to know healing. As Catholics, what's different about their healing if they're Catholics? Not just the hard moral questions. And you know, one of them is one of the head persons up there in neurology, brain, and it's so interesting talking to him. Anyway, just a couple of, you know, in terms of our exchange. What's amazing, and you see that, and in his posing of the question, is the first thing we have to do, it seems to me, is not confuse our tradition, rightly understood, with a Cartesian tradition. That is, in Thomism, the soul is the form of the body. It's also substantial, that is, it transcends the body, but it's the form of the body. What does that imply? For Descartes, the soul is not the form of the body. Descartes, it's not a soul. I mean, a soul is the form, and Aristotle, it's the form of the body, so it's intrinsically related. You're not two beings, you're one. And yet, what informs the body is spiritual, and there's a sign of that is capacity for self-reflexivity and so on. Okay, we'll come back to that. But the point I want to make is that immediately sets up a whole different situation, and we've had interesting discussion just on that much. That there's no need to fear that all of these things are ingredient in human activity. We're not absolutely free. You know, I mean, I can't go over there and jump out the window and just say I will not to fall, right? I mean, there's certain, but the point is whether something determines it, and or is innerly conditioning it. And then the question of determinism is very tricky. I mean, because determinism, Noam Chomsky, the linguist, had these arguments with, I think it was B.F. Skinner, who faded immediately as soon as he died. I mean, you know, his view is like a reductive psychology. But the point was that at least in Skinner's form of this, they could never show empirically a one-to-one correlation on any of these things. In other words, to show you a set of physical conditions that absolutely explain a certain human behavior. I mean, so a complete determinism, as far as I know, there's still an act of faith involved in that, because they haven't explained an instance of it. Do you see the point? Which is not to say, so I'm making 2 points. But the first point is that, yes, I am conditioned. I mean, all of these things, of course, we should expect it, because the soul is the form of the body. I'm the body. I am my body, albeit more than a body. But if you start out with this position, there are 2 things, you lose. I mean, how do you explain, you know, this lobe does this and this lobe does that, and you get hit on the head here and you can't think any longer, and so on. So that's that. And then the second point is, I don't know of any exhaustive claim. There's a lot more that has to be said here. But when you talk about determinism, I don't know of any instance where they've adduced evidence that will establishes conclusively a one-to-one correlation. That this environment necessarily brought about that environment. The following. But there's much more to be said. That's not adequate, but it's a direction.
Yes?
Yes, we have a problem in the church and in our nation in that we have very few priests. And this has been going on for a long time. What is the church doing wrong, or is this something from our culture as a whole? As you mentioned that culture is defined by one's religion. How are we going to go forward and meet our needs for the sacraments?
Yeah, I mean, those are huge questions. I mean, I can sort of describe something. It's always hard. How do you get it started? But to me, what happens is I'm so convinced of this that you have to encounter the faith as a matter of reality. I mean, that may seem odd, but it's not a piety, it's not a morality, it isn't a function. In other words, why do I say that? It's why has John Paul II, for example, what is it that he tapped, and the response he tapped among young people? It was the life in his being. In other words, this is a man who this was life and death. It was something that contained his whole being, and that is what I said before about beauty evoking and eliciting. It seems to me nothing can happen. Well, I mean, there's the Holy Spirit, relation to God, and all of these things. Okay, obviously, but if something is going to happen, there has to be the beginning of that then elicits this kind of response. I have to say that students, and not just to talk about our institute, but students come, and they one of the things hopefully they learn is that these doctrines are also ways of life. They're flesh and blood, and what happens is it excites you. I mean, it just does. And then it excites. The interesting thing is that John Paul II inspires radicality. I mean, in the etymological sense, going to the roots. Why? Because he lived from the roots. So, how to do that is another thing, but it means the formation has to be, it has to englobe the full of humanity, and the full of being, and not a practice. It's, I have to say, and if I can say this without ever pointing to any particular people, but over the years in teaching priests often, what's disappointing to me is how often people who are studying for the priesthood, they're less interested than lay people. Why is that? What is that? That is very fascinating to me. And I mean, in other words, they want an answer often, or they want to know how to preach, or they want an argument regarding preaching, or this. I don't mean to be critical here. The point is, you want to know the question. I mean, to be involved in the understanding of that this is a reality. And I must say that more and more when young people come, they come with that sense. That they sense that there's something really disordered in the culture that has to do with the whole of their being, and so they want to deal with that, and I think that is the only way forward. And I think it involves a renewal of living out the Christian form in states of life, virginal consecration, and marriage with integrity, as ways of life that inform everything. And I could say a lot more about that. And it seems to me the priesthood in that context, and I don't know the how of it, but that's a kind of description. It's the englobing, the embodying in flesh and blood of the whole.
Yes, gentleman right back there. I missed you. Yes.
Okay, yeah. What are the merits of when doing philosophy being a Aristotelian or a Thomist or an Augustinian or a Kantian, so forth, rather than trying to develop or attempting to develop a philosophy not directly derived from a teacher of old, but asking new questions that arise from the reality that one encounters today?
Good question. I think, first what I'd say is, I think the questions are always new. I mean, I think that experience, there are changes, but there's still questions of a human being that share a human nature. And I think human nature is open to history. I mean, and you could talk about how that doesn't lead to relativism. So there's a newness, but the newness is always a newness that the questions, we can read Socrates, we can read Plato and see that, you know, these are the same, the language is different, but here are the same sorts of things that I grapple with. And what for me, this is one of the things, I mean, I want to be properly understood, you know, is one of the things about being Catholic is there's a sense in which you don't have to be that smart or that holy, you know what I mean? In other words, why? Because you can steal from the communion of saints, okay? And you have the sacraments. You know, in other words, that these are the all-stars. I mean, these are people, and it's characteristic of every field, but these people that are saints and doctors of the church have, with the help of God, penetrated reality, and they open up my own experience. I mean, given that we have a common nature, that I participate in the communion of saints, and I think it's just on a human level why the Catholic tradition is always so strong. I mean, the crumbling of other traditions, and you have this incredibly rich tradition, because there's a real community that's gone on and building on each other. And I mean, it's sacramental. I mean, we have that benefit that you have the promise of God's fidelity, but also with the saints. And I think what I would answer that is try reading Plato, and Plato's a good place to start because his questions are very concrete. Do they speak to you? Now, granted, the language is different, but and ask yourself whether the questions he's asking aren't the sorts of questions that I find myself asking. You know, I mean, what's true? What's good? What's life all about? Is success the point? Is this what I'm headed for? And you know, in life, and the sophists. You know, there's a book. Is somewhat related to this, you might be interested in, author Pierre Hadot, H-A-D-O-T, and he writes on philosophy as a way of being, and he's got a command of the whole tradition. He's very fascinating on this kind of question. I mean, the different ways that questions are asked in history, and what like the sophists, you know, what happened with the sophists is, in contrast to Socrates, is it wasn't a way of life. They didn't study in common. It was giving courses for money in order to win an argument, or it was basically an artificial environment, and to be successful. And Hadot says this is the mode of philosophy, philosophical education that really prevailed, or mode of education really prevailed in the West. But I would say read someone like Plato, and ask your questions and read him, and see if he isn't helping elucidate those questions, and what you think is inadequate. But then you have to give a reason to show why he may be inadequate, what's better.
Oh, here, right here. I'm sorry.
Okay. I want to venture an opinion and see how you react to it. I think one of the problems with the Roman Catholic Church in America dates back maybe to the 1940s, when the clergy began to take on secular cultural functions, and eventually came, I might almost say, to despise their properly sacramental roles. And the monastic order was infected. It was such a tragedy that American monks had to go to Hindu masters to learn how to meditate because the order of St. Benedict was no longer interested in the contemplative life. And One of them came back with a Hindu technique he discovered had been taught by the fathers of the church years ago. Today, I think those parts of the church, the treasure, the sacramentality, they're not the parts that are dying on the vine. There's a wonderful little order out in Chicago that's liturgical in its
In the city,
focus.
the monastery in the city in Chicago?
A little bit outside.
Oh, okay, I'm thinking of another one.
It's such a new order, they're not even outside the diocese yet. There's a need for these things.
Absolutely.
Benedict hit it right on the head when he talked about the South American bishops. He said, we appreciate what you're doing for us socially, we need spirituality, so we become Protestants.
Yeah. No, I think that, there was a point there, and now it's maybe it'll come back to me, but, it's this line, that McIntyre, that often gets reiterated, but I think it's the point of Benedict, is that what the age needs is another Saint Benedict. And I think that's a way of talking about, if I understood you, I think, the treasures that are built into these old forms, and to see them not as just sort of marginal, or like a sacrament, for example, to understand that a sacrament is meant, it's a key to the whole of reality. I mean, it's a sacrament, but when I receive the sacrament of the Eucharist and go out into the world, I ought not to be merely a sociological presence. I ought to be a sacramental presence. And that sacrament, it is something that should in some way reach to the ends of the earth, really. And the riches of our tradition, and I think that's what's John Paul II and Benedict have really tapped into. You know, and recovering the heart of these things, and showing that they embrace everything. They're not just inner ecclesial realities, which, you know, you go in, so to speak, and you charge your sacramental batteries in order to go out into the culture and be moral. I mean, you ought to be moral in the culture, okay? But the point is, you should be sacramental, and then morality is enfolded in that. And then people would be much more attracted to Christianity. Although we always have to be careful on that, because when I think of that, because we always have in the background, we ought to keep Jesus in mind and say, look, Jesus was pretty attractive in what he proposed, and where did it get him? In other words, you're not guaranteed success. I really do believe, and I know this is going to sound, but I really believe this, an unspoken assumption of many Christians today is that if Jesus had had the benefit of liberal institutions, he would not have had to undergo the passion and death. That we figured it out. We have these benign institutions where everybody is freed, and that's pernicious nonsense. And in other words, that the vaunted neutrality is not neutrality. I mean, and we don't have to go very far on that. Athens was a democracy. I mean, and we saw what it did to Socrates, although it is worth seeing he lived until he was 70. So, I mean, you know, he may not have lived quite so long, but the point is, that's how he ended, and it was a democratic society. So democracies, you know, that's, again, one of the fundamental problems. I mean, it isn't, this vaunted freedom is not just empty freedom. It has implications, and we're beginning to see that now in the question of religious liberty, seems to me. But
Yes?
If you say our economic system is puritanical and enlightenment, how do you envision an economic system, or is there one based on love or beauty, or how do you live within a system?
that's a huge. I mean, it really, no. That's a fundamental. I mean, it's a huge. And I think I don't have a simple answer. I mean, I point to Caritas in Veritate. But it's important to see, I mean, there's a lot of discussion whether the church proposes a third way. You know, there's capitalism and socialism. And I don't think it's a third way. That makes it in the same category as the other two. It's a third alternative. It's a different ecclesiology that has economic implications. And I do think it really makes a big difference. And you know, this is the other thing about, it seems to me what we're talking about is something very deep in transforming a being, which means, in a certain sense, everything has to change. And everything has something good in it. So you don't sit around and say, well, I'm going to wait until I finally get this job and then I'm going to try to change that structure. You start today, here and now, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, son, daughter, you have a job, and you live being as gift, which means you pay more attention to things. You take more time to do things properly. You do things intrinsically, what's intrinsically good, and so forth. And it'll cost you. That's the thing, is these things, it will slow down your career. There will be a sacrifice. But it seems to me that's the way, and I think that there are a lot of things that have to happen, but I think with families, families living with integrity, you know, the consecrated virginal life lived with integrity, living the full Christian form. So those are some comments. I think in America, and again, this is a whole discussion. I think in America, the tradition in America that I think is most interesting, that is a Native American movement that has a lot of things that are very important, is what is called Chesterton's distributism, Southern agrarianism. There's a book by Eugene Genovese on the Southern tradition, which is a set of lectures he gave at Harvard, which is absolutely wonderful. And he sets that forth, but they wanted a more organic quality to life, centered in religion, the importance of the family, the importance of ownership of property as an expression. Dorothy Day was very much a part at the core. What she wanted to do had to do with distributism. And it seems to me there's something, I think Wendell Berry is one of the best articulators of this. And anyway, those, and it's native to America. That really is American, but it's trying, and it doesn't mean everybody ought to go back to a farm, but there's something about taking care, that he sees topsoil, carrying cultivation, Joseph Pieper Leisure, cultivation, taking care of something, being in a place, a certain sense of place and time and so forth. I think that's a tradition in America, and unfortunately, it's gone. I mean, as Genovese points out, because of the slavery question and the Civil War, that's just become you know, you can't talk about that because people think, you talk about Southern agrarianism, it's a hidden racism. It's a complicated thing. But Genovese, you know, his book, he is great. He was Elizabeth Fox Genovese. I don't know at what point they got married, but he was a convert. But he's very witty in this book, and he says, you know what? He said, who am I? You know, born in Brooklyn, a Jew, became a communist. And he said, I end up in Georgia, and I'm supporting Southern agrarianism. You know, became a Catholic, so I mean, what's my authority? But he goes through that, he sees the limits of Southern agrarianism, but he says, if America, he ends his book by saying, if America, despite some of the problems, if America doesn't hold on to the core of what they wanted to protect there, he says, for his own part, he's glad he is old and won't live to see the outcome in the culture, what it will say about the culture. So he's very serious about it.
What was the name of this book?
The Southern Agrarians, or the Southern Tradition, or the Southern Tradition, Eugene Genovese. It's a little paperback, three lectures at Harvard. Wonderful.
We'll have two more questions, okay? Gentlemen, yes.
David, just to follow up on the point of economics, I've been delving into the writings and also videos online of Stefano Zamagni, the economist who I believe is the inspiration
Yeah.
for Caritas Veritate. And what's interesting there is that he's a real macro economist. I mean, he talks about all of the things that economists talk about, and he deals with inequality, and his critique of unfettered capitalism is quite radical. And along those lines, and he talks about the civil economy and for-profit companies that embody reciprocity. So I think there is,
Right.
in what his thought, a lot of connections to real-world economy. Not to
Right.
put down the distributists, but
Right.
a lot of it seems very fringe.
Right.
I mean, great ideas, but there is a yearning to have Catholic social teaching really connect in a real-world way without denying what you're talking about, giftedness and reciprocity. I think his writings
No, I
are
agree.
fantastic.
No, and they're doing, did he respond to that statement by the Pontifical Council for Justice and
The
Peace?
last one,
Yeah,
I didn't see
there
anything.
is, I thought he was one of the people. I sort of hesitate to get into that, but, yeah, I mean, maybe, is there any interest in that? That there was a big controversy about that statement from the Council of Justice. If there isn't, I won't say anything. I mean, but,
just issued by the Pope?
yeah, no, not by the Pope. That's the problem, is by this council, and it turns out that it hadn't been vetted.
It was terrible.
But the reason I mention that is that's the kind, it seems to me, that document, and then it turns out there were real problems that hadn't been vetted by the Vatican. I mean, which is very, very strange. You know, that Bertoni came out a few days later and said, it came, the day before it was released, it came to us, we had no time to vet it. And so, but why do I bring that up? Is it seems to me that what you see there is an appeal to world community that takes a kind of precipitous form, global form, with precisely not accommodating the need for subsidiarity. I mean, what you need, whatever else you say, there has to be the formation of small communities, beginning with a community of a family and a local community. Whatever you say about an economy, it has to be a sort of vague cosmopolitan globalism. It seems to me is lethal. I mean, in other words, subsidiarity has to be absolutely at the core of that. And I suspect that this economist is open to that, because some of the communities that he refers to, like the economics of communion, it seems to me respect that.
Well, that's a big, that's a whole political football.
But no, but anyway, it's a lot. No, because I think solidarity and to give, I mean, the risk is in the real world, it seems to me, is that if you have a cosmopolitan global economy, it's going to look very much like a kind of tyranny of technocracy. You know, I mean, it seems to me, you can't, I mean, it has to grow, it has to be related to local communities, whatever else. It's got to presuppose those.
I mean, the only point to that is he does deal on a macro level.
Oh.
With inequality, with
And
speculation,
I think you
and
do.
so on. So
Yeah,
you find people all along the spectrum.
yes,
Buying Catholic thought.
yeah.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, Father? Okay, I'm sorry.
Professor, thank you for your time with us. If I could venture perhaps a more personal question. You talked about philosophy as a wonder, encountering reality and a desire to know things for the way they are, and openness to the transcendent. Were there any moments in your life where there were particular powerful encounters, either from your childhood or growing up? And also, how, as a husband and a father, did you foster that and encourage that in your children?
I like that question. If I could tell with, I mean, these experiences with your kids. Let me say that. I mean, we had some fun. I mean, just a couple of more memorable occasions. I hope this stuff gets understood, but I took them to Disney World, which I never would today probably. But I mean, you learn this is the sin of my youth. I took them. That my daughter was, I would say 12-ish, my son 11, and my second son 9, and we were there looking around. My daughter said, "I want to go see. Can we go to General Electric?" carousel of progress. And I said, I hesitated for a second, I said, sure. I said, but first I said, let's go get some ice cream, you know, so we went and got ice cream. I said, look, and I mean, you know, we're sort of just, so I said, we can, we're gonna go over to the General Electric Carousel of Progress. I said, but first, you all need to understand that the sense in which the carousel of progress is actually a carousel of decline. and so they all laughed, and we went in, and if you know this, they have these things, and they you know, you see each 10 years or whatever the improvements, and my 9-year-old son, I want to tell another story or two about him, because it was pretty consistent pattern with him. And so the thing comes, and he one of the things, and he goes, "Oh no, Dad, don't look, it's a telephone." So then, you know, then I talked to him about majors when I was teaching at Notre Dame at the time, and my daughter was a freshman, and my son was senior in high school, and my young one was a sophomore. And I said, okay, what do you guys want to major in? And my daughter said, well, I think, she said, I think history of art, you know, I want to do something like that. And okay, that's great. And then my son, which really surprised me, I hadn't known it because I was teaching in the program of liberal studies then, and he said, well, I'm going to major in the program of liberal studies. Hey, well, I mean, that was great, you know. And then then Brian, the young one, once again, the one who made the comment there, I said, so Brian, what are you thinking about majoring in? He said, accounting. and I said, okay. I said, time out. I said, just so you know the rules of the game here. I said, first of all, you're free. You can major in anything you want. I said, you have to understand that I'm going to pay for your education only if you major in something that's not useful. And he says, so he hesitated a little bit, you know, and he said, wait a minute. He said, did I say accounting? He said, I meant mathematics. So that's what he did. He majored in mathematics, and then his junior year he switched to double majors in computers, and without telling me. And so he majored in computers, and then he got in touch. His company does computer software work for the NFL, and then he decided at some point he found his own company, a computer software company. So he started his company, and he named it Saggio. Okay, Saggio, sagesse, wisdom, and this was his. You know, Dad, I'm going to start this company. What do you? Saggio, you know, sort of like this, you know, his computer company is called Wisdom. So, anyway, so those things, I mean, that's always been sort of an ongoing point of exchange, and I mean, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you know, to do that sort of thing. And what was the other part of your question? I forget the first part.
In your own life, growing up, where you had a moment, a particularly powerful moment of wonder about reality and openness to the transcendent?
All I have to say is that I spent most of my time in high school depressed, okay? and because my father was starting a company, he was an entrepreneur in manufacturing, and my parents were very Catholic, and I would say in some ways culturally Protestant, very Catholic in their beliefs, and concerned about the culture, but it was a growing thing that regarding I mean, sort of what am I going to do with my life, and that really was kind of the origin of it. I mean, you talk about wonder. It's just that question of what is the. I mean, I think we all have those experiences. For me, it happened in high school, and then I went off to the seminary when I was 17. But that sort of thing, and I am grateful to my parents, because the key thing was my parents. My father always had a cultural judgment on things, always, and he was raised on a farm, and he didn't complete the 10th grade, and so everything he did he figured out, but he as a consequence he always had a cultural judgment, And those things, I mean, you know, most of the time you spend your youth fighting it. I mean, that's what you do, you fight, but you realize it's sort of a defining thing. I mean, I remember being in the 8th grade, the first time there was a little get-together involved boys and girls, you know, and I asked if I could go, and my father said, "Why do you want to go?" And I said, "Everybody's going." And he said, "That's no reason." Now that's a very simple thing, but I never forgot it. I mean, I was so deflated and I couldn't go, but you know, that's no reason. So that really registers, the fact that everyone isn't doing it. I mean, you don't understand that, but it provokes things.
Thank you.
Okay,